A video popped up on my feed that was talking about how important this one thing is, and if you don't do it, your mixes won't sound professional. It won't sound as good as a mix done on an SSL console if you don't set this one thing. Let's unpack why it's total bullshit, why that's completely not true. You shouldn't worry about this in the slightest. You're looking at one thing only right now, mono track. If we keep this pan down the center, zero pan, right down the middle, pan law is in effect on any DAW. You're always going to have what's called pan law. On Pro Tools, they call it pan depth. See this? This is often misconstrued as meaning your left and right can go further if you have this set to a higher number. It's bullshit. It's not what it means. Pan depth means how much is the center being lowered. That means when you're center panned, how much is the volume compensated because you have two speakers playing the same thing. That would typically result in a boost in volume. So in order to offset this and make it sound like there's no boost in volume when both speakers play the same information in the center, there's a pan law applied. In this case, -3 dB is the default on most DAWs. If all you're interested in is what you should set your pan law to, I'll just tell you right now, -3 is what I use all the time and have for a very long time, and it works perfectly. There's really no reason to set it to anything else. Now, let me explain why I set it that way and what makes sense about -3 compared to other things. And let me also tell you, when you're using certain plugins, the pan law is completely ignored. So that's also very important to note, because you could think that this needs to be set at -4.5 because that's what the pan depth is on, SSL consoles. They're -4.5. Well, let me first make sure everyone realizes that since all it is volume, and since that number in the center is the maximum amount of volume lowered from the center. -4.5 means down the center you'll have a decrease in volume of -4.5 when the pan is down the center exactly. But as you pan off to the side a little bit, this amount changes. It goes from the maximum amount to slightly less the more you pan it, less of a decrease. And then as you get to the side, it's the complete full volume. So in other words, it's only being decreased down the center, and as you move off the center, it comes back to normal. Less of a decrease in volume, meaning the volume goes up as you move it to the side. And as soon as it's hard panned, left or right, there's no decrease at all. So it's a gradual slope, all right? That's the first thing to note. The second thing is, because this is only relevant in one circumstance. It's relevant when you draw automation in. In other words, you come in here, you go to pan, and you actually draw in what you want. So that means maybe you have something like this going on, and you draw in a move from one side to the other through the center. When you do this, pan law is in effect. So the reason I use -3 is because there's a lot of plugins you could add that will make this pan law completely null and void. For example, if you were to use an SSL plugin like the SSL 4KG, for example, and you use a version that's like mono stereo, right? What it means is it's a pseudo stereo thing. It takes your track that's mono and gives you a way to still pan within it, because the SSL plugin can be run using the 360 view, which looks like this. So you can have your whole console up of SSL stuff in which you might want to pan right on the console. So by using a mono to stereo track, it takes that mono signal and allows you the ability to pan it left and right in the plugin. Okay, now that's why you might want to use that. When that's happening, what you should note is, look at the volume when it's in the center. You see where it's sitting like right here, roughly right above that -24. When I move this to the side, notice what happens, how it jumps up in volume. There's an internal pan law in this SSL plugin that's actually set to -3 dB. Now you could say, oh, that's weird, right? SSL's plugins are negative 3 dB pan law, but their console is negative 4.5. Why is that? Because they felt in plugin form, negative 3 actually works better. So they set this thing to negative 3. When you turn it off to the right, you get that boost. When you go back to the center, it drops it by 3 dB. And it takes a second to actually get to the reading, but this is also can be confirmed many ways. It can be confirmed by just coming over here and switching to peak. And now you see how it says negative 20 when it's down the center. When I pan it off to the side, that's negative 20. When I pan it down the center, I'm going to reset it. Look, negative 23. You reset by option clicking in case you've never used peak volume before. That's how you figure out what it is. So you option click. It's negative 23 down the center. Hard pan, negative 20. Down the center, negative 23. And then as I move it, notice as I move it, 21.6, 21, 20.9. See what I'm saying? As you move it, the more you move it, the more it gets less and less of a decrease till you get to the side and there's no decrease in volume at all. All right, so when I take this plugin off, we're at negative 20. So just by putting the plugin on and panning it down the center, it drops the volume to negative 23. All right, now what you should note, there's so many things to note, but one is the reason the pan law in the DAW has nothing to do with this is because I could prove it by showing it, but the point is, as soon as you add a mono to stereo plugin, it takes one of the channels and pans it hard left and one pan hard right. If it didn't do that, you wouldn't be able to pan within the plugin and have it actually get to the side, because the final boss is actually the pan pots on your DAW. This is not the final boss. The plugins, the way the signal flow works, it goes from your tracks down the plugins. The pan pots actually last. So that means this wouldn't have the ability to go far left unless this became a stereo track that was pan hard left and hard right. So because that's pan hard left and hard right, it allows us the ability to pan stereo, pan left, or pan right. Notice how it moves, okay? But basically what I'm saying is if you add a plugin that allows you to pan anything, you are now subject to the pan law within that plugin. It's no longer about what your DAW is set to, because as you can see, it's been set to negative 4.5 this whole time, yet we still have a 3 dB decrease. And it's the same if I set it to negative 6. Because this plugin's here that's controlling the panning, this is the pan law. And because our DAW has one channel pan hard left and one hard right, no pan law is applied. Because this would have to be down the center for the DAW's pan law to be applied. Whereas when it's hard left and hard right, it's exempt from the pan law. So this applies to all plugins. So just like right now, just to show you, when it's down the center, I reset this, negative 23, even though it's negative 6 on pan depth. See what I mean? It has no effect. It's always been negative 23 for us, no matter what I had this set to. So it's negative 2.5, it's still negative 23. It doesn't matter. Now I move it to the side, negative 20. No matter what this is set to, on the side, it's always going to be negative 20. Got me? So that's because the pan law in the DAW is not actually being applied. The pan law within the plugin is. Now this applies to auto pan also. Now this is where I get into why I like to use the negative 3, and I think it's far superior to negative 4.5 or anything like that. Because historically, throughout time, when I use autopan for something like ad libs or, to create some movement on an instrument where I don't want to notice a change in volume, I just want it to move left and move right. And as it does that, it goes through the center. If I perceived a change in volume, that would be a negative. I want it to just move in the background kind of naturally and not draw my attention to it as it gets super loud from the center to the side. The center is going to be the lowest. So if you have your pan law set to negative 4.5 instead of negative 3, it's a dB and a half lower in the center, which means you might hear it perfectly clear on the side. As it pans through the center, you might lose it completely. And as it goes to the right side, you're going to hear it substantially more. What do you think the pan law is in autopan? Well, I'll give you a hint. If we lower this thing all the way, and you can see where it is now, as it gets off to the side, when it's completely off to the side, if I keep resetting, see it says negative 20 on our peak, right? Now, this is totally, like I said again, this is irrespective of what this is set to, because it's set to negative 2.5, but I'll set it to negative 6. Look, as we go through the center and I keep resetting the peak, look what happens. Negative 23. Did you see it hit 23 before it move over? That's the maximum. It doesn't go above 23. So it's actually applying a negative 3 pan law in this plugin. And it works seamlessly to move your stuff from left to right without noticing a change in volume. That's exactly why I like my pan law in the DAW set to negative 3, because I don't want to notice a change in volume. If we take this off and we go to Pan Man, this is one of my favorite panning plugins also. These are my 2 favorite auto pan plugins. And we'll slow the rate way down. It's the same thing. Let's get our negative 21 point whatever. It went to 20. Let's slow it down even more so it makes it easier to see. So when it's off to the side, look, you're at negative 20 when it's off to the side, okay? And at a certain point when it gets to the side, see now the slope starts creeping back. Now I'm going to lower it a lot so we can catch it down the center. Look, it was negative 22.9 again. So it's a maximum of, it's actually 3 dB, but getting it to stop dead on that center point is the only way it'll actually show us negative 23. But as you can see, by the way, it's negative 22.9 when it gets super close to the center. That's what you got. You got 3 dB of pan law happening within these plugins. And that's irrespective of what it's set to on our pan law. It's got nothing to do with this. So, and that's because when you add one of those plugins, notice how in order to get the ability to hear a pan from left to right, it makes it a stereo track, and it makes it where the left side is hard left and the right side is hard right. So just by adding a plugin here that needs to be pan related, it makes your track a stereo track. And that way within the plugin, it can do its movement. And when that happens, hard left and hard right is exempt from your DAW's pan law. Now, what I said before, which matters, is that when you pan something, like let me take these off so that we have just our mono track again. When you pan something, when you're writing automation, okay, it's going to be a very similar thing to when you're using AutoPan or PanMan. You want to not hear any volume difference when you pan something hard off to the side, down the center, and hard to the other side. And the same way AutoPan has a built-in pan law that can't be changed of -3, and the same with PanMan, that's the exact same thing you're going to want to happen when you pan left to right. You don't want to perceive a difference. So you want it to just smoothly go through the center, and then when it comes out the other side, it should feel like you didn't raise the volume. So when I set my DAW at -3, that's the feeling I get, just like within PanMan or AutoPan or any of those. All right, so using stuff like this, you can draw your panning automation however you want, and assuming you don't have a plugin here that has something to do with panning. Because if the plugin is just, you know, a mono version of like the SSL 4KE or something, you don't have pan options. So it's going to make no difference. This is, you know, this is still subservient to DAW pan law, to your Pro Tools pan law, or whatever DAW you're using, to the pan law there. This plugin's got nothing to do with it. But if you add a plugin that allows you to control panning, now all of a sudden that plugin is the boss of the pan law, because in order for that to happen, your track goes left, right, which means there's no pan law applied. So pan law is only applied when your DAW is in the center position, and as it moves off the center, the decrease in volume happens less and less and less and less. It's maximum down the center, and as you move off it, the volume increases, right? So the decrease gets lowered. The center is the lowest because if you think about it, you're panned off to the side, only one speaker's feeding information. When it's down the center, they're both feeding information. So it has to be lowered or you will feel like the thing is louder. Now, the reason this matters not at all when you're mixing is because every step of your mix, you are deciding the volume balance between how loud you want your stuff that you pan to the side and how loud you want the center. You are physically, manually controlling that by saying to yourself, okay, my kick's down the center, I want it to be this volume. My guitar on this side, I want it to be this volume. And you're manually setting all these volumes. So you are deciding how much your sides are in volume compared to your center. You're deciding that every step of the way. So why would you ever go in and change that later? Don't ever do that. Set the pan depth or pan law to whatever you want, then mix your song. Don't experiment after you've mixed it with different pan laws. All that's really saying is you didn't mix your song good. You didn't mix it well. And as a result, you want to experiment with just moving the faders to crazy different positions when you're done because you didn't like the work you did. That's really all you're doing by doing that. So that's a no-go. Don't audition different pan depths at all. Just mix it the way you want, and then it's fine. Anytime you draw automation in, that's the only time pan depth is really going to be relevant to you. That's really it. Because like I said, once you put plugins on, it's not even part of the equation. And once you pan stuff off to one side or the other compared to the center, you're going to be setting the volume of everything by your taste on what you want. So that's understood, right? The other thing I think people get wrong and confused is they think that once you print your mix, wherever it is played back, like a stereo in the car or a Bluetooth speaker or something, they think those things have pan law applied. They don't. All you have when you're done with your printing your mix is a left and a right. That's it. You got left information and right information. Every stereo track in the world has left information and right information only. There's no center. There's no sides. There's left and right. So once you print your song, you could call it print, which is old school. You call it bounce if you want. You bounce your mix, whatever you want to call it. Once you got one stereo file, there's no pan law applied anywhere. So stop thinking that the final boss of pan law is the car stereo or whatever. That ain't true either. So there's a lot of misconceptions built around this stuff. There's some people who think your mix will never be as wide if you don't have the pan law thing set to whatever an SSL console is. It's nonsense because every step of the way you are deciding how loud your sides are compared to your center in your mix yourself. So the pan law is totally irrelevant. In other words, you're going to compensate for whatever your pan law is set to anyway. So if it's set to negative 2.5 and you want the sides louder, anything you pan to the sides, you will have made louder. And if you want the center louder, anything you pan to the center, you'll make louder. So setting it to negative 2.5, negative 3, negative 4.5, negative 6, it doesn't matter. It only makes a difference to me because I don't want to hear a difference in volume when I automate panning. That's the only time it actually matters. When you draw in automation, if you add an auto pan plugin or something, like I said, it doesn't matter at all. I think people get very confused because of that. They use the word depth. So they think, ooh, I want my stuff deeper. And they don't go far enough to realize that they just mean pan law, and it can't make anything deeper. It can't make anything wider. All it does is apply a law that you've already compensated for when you're mixing. So one of the most destructive comments on those videos where people say that this matters is people, in the comment section saying, now I got to go back and check my sessions and, I need to re-release stuff because the pan depth was different. And because of what you're saying, it's like that video like that is really destructive. And in my opinion, it should be addressed once the person who made it realizes they make mistakes. We're all human. We make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Check out our live streams. We do them very often where I mix a song from scratch and people all over the world in their own studios, engineers just like you at all skill levels, take part. They ask questions in the chat. They add their own, what they're working on and what they're going through, things that worked for them recently. It's just a great way to be part of a group of engineers just like yourself and not feel totally isolated when you're doing some of the stuff we do. That's really kind of specialized and make you feel crazy if you're alone in a room for hours and hours and hours working on something. Why? Be part of people like yourself doing the exact same thing. It makes it feel more human. Makes it feel more easy. Everything becomes easier in that environment, in my opinion. And there's no high horses over there. So feel free, come through. All genres are welcome. The song I'm about to finish today is like a funky alternative one. So I'll be on live stream for a few hours today. So any questions about this or anything else, feel free, throw it in the chat. Happy to help answer any questions. And there's plenty of people who watch those streams who are also super knowledgeable and can help and answer your questions as well. So you kind of get a nice, melting pot of information over there. So looking forward to seeing you then. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.